Hello, everyone. As Pindi just introduced me, I am not Jagmeet Singh, as some of the reporters might get confused about all the people wearing turbans. Just wanted to get that to the side. I'm the CTO and co-founder of UrbanLogiq. We are a unified analytics platform for cities. We work with city governments. And we work with the data silos that are trapped within city stacks, and we provide a more efficient city planning tools for the cities. So what I'm going to talk today is how do you validate your idea? And the reason I want to talk about it is I am a serial entrepreneur. I have done a bunch of startups. Some of them fizzled, some of them did okay, until I met this amazing team. I have my co-founders here. Herman is here right at the back, and so is Arun, and Leah and Jen and Bo are also here. They're part of our team, so I have this amazing team. So I wanted to talk about, for the many of those in the attendance who might be thinking about what is the process of how do you think about an idea, and how do you go from beginning of this idea towards success. A little bit about our story. We started about a year and a half ago, about a year, 5 months old company. We started with this one idea. We went to a hackathon and had this brainstorming of an idea. And since then, it has been a crazy ride. We were a startup in residence for the city of San Francisco, where we helped them develop their economic development platform. Since then, we worked with a number of different cities. We have we were incubated in San Francisco. We went through 500 startups. And since then, we have raised quite a bit of capital, and we just moved our office from Surrey to Vancouver. So back to the presentation. Also, I have a thick Indian accent, so if you don't get something I don't say, well, I'm not sorry. Get used to it. It is probably a good idea around here. First of all, there's some few disclaimers in my presentation. The first one, everyone has an opinion, and what I'm going to present in front of you is an opinion, right? So just take it at that, right? Second, the idea of rules of thumbs and exceptions, right? What I'm going to talk today is like what works, and there are always exceptions in the way things can work, right? So please don't come back to me and say, hey, but for this company. So just wanted to lay it out there. And then add some salt, right? Take everything that I say with a grain of salt, right? Your experience is, your voyage to develop your startup is going to be very unique because you are part of that process, right? So you bring certain qualities that I don't have or someone else doesn't have. So you are an essential component. So your voyage is going to be a little bit different. But let's talk about the rule of thumbs. So this is our co-founder team. I just introduced Herman and Arun. Mark, who's our CEO, he's currently out of town. He is in San Francisco. And just, if it was not clear, it's that guy. Prior to doing this startup, I worked for a bunch of universities. I worked in Washington as a civil rights advocate. And I have worked in open source, and I have been a serial entrepreneur. So what do I see as the key factors of success? So this is a model from Bill Gross from Idea Labs, who also did a TED talk that you should probably check out. And he says for any company to find success, the biggest factor is the timing, followed by the team, then the execution, then the idea, and then the funding, right? And a lot of people, when we have this great idea, we think in our heads, we prioritize these things in a very different way, right? This data was collected by reviewing about 200 different startups and seeing how they were performing. So let's go over each one of these ideas. So this is Gartner's hype cycle for emerging technologies. You should all, it's probably a good idea to kind of keep an eye on. Whenever there's a new technology in market, you're thinking about, oh, this is a new thing, right? It's always a good idea to look at what time or at what point in this chart this current technology lies, right? Whenever a new technology comes out, there's a lot of hype around it, but it takes and right after this hype, there is a time when it goes through this trough disillusionment. Again, as I said, there are exceptions. If you think about Amazon, it started around the time when no one else was thinking about e-commerce, right? So exceptions are there, but it's always a good idea if we're going to venture into a very new kind of technology. It's usually a good idea to keep an eye on, at what point has the dust settled around this technology, right? So I think timing is the most important factor. The next factor is the team. I think one of the things that your startup, it doesn't matter what technology you're starting on, will go through ups and downs. And there will be times where you will look yourself in the mirror and you would say, what the F I'm doing, right? I think at that point of time, the only thing that you can rely on are the co-founders that you can absolutely trust more than your own intuition, right? So having a strong team, I will give you an example. When this is last winter, we were called to Silicon Valley to interview for the incubator that we were joining. And at that point of time, we didn't have much money. Arun drove his 1985 Oldsmobile. We went through a snowstorm and went to San Francisco for an interview. Those kind of moments are the times when you realize that you will depend a lot more than just your work for the survival of your startup. So have some good co-founders. The next thing you should look at is what is your comparative advantage, and then what is your competitive moat, right? Your comparative advantage might be, most of the time, it boils down to expertise in the team, right? Or the people you can rely on. Or let's say you have suddenly identified, if you are, for example, a startup which is focusing on a certain kind of academic research and you have only found cure for cancer, right? Or something like that. You have that competitive advantage, but most of the time it's gonna come down to what is the expertise that you have within the co-founders, within the team. And then what is your competitive moat? Once you have taken a little bit of traction, if it is something that is making money, there will be competitors that will come after you. And at that point of time, what is the competitive advantage that you have? And sometimes it's just that, the first person advantage or the second person advantage, or you have made a certain advancement in your stack that other people will take time to catch on. So think about these things, when you're thinking about ideas. And this is very, very important. A lot of people, and I have done this, a few times, they get excited about an idea and they will jump into the idea. I think one of the things that you need to think about, you may have the perfect idea, you may have the market for it, but would you survive long enough to be there to provide those services, even if your idea is currently sellable, right? So planning that ahead of time is a really, really important thing that many startups usually miss, right? Thankfully, Herman here had, in his previous life was he comes from a financial management background, so we were good with that. A lot of people give a lot of stress on the idea. It is important, but not as much as you think, right? A lot of people place so much value in the idea that they fear sharing the idea with others, right? And I've met a bunch of entrepreneurs, people who want to start businesses, who say, I have this great idea, but I don't want to, I can't talk with you, without an NDA. First of all, I personally consider ideas are a dime a dozen, right? I think if your idea has the potential, most likely someone else is either doing it. If you think no one else is doing it, then you need to rethink, does it have a value, right? And there is only one way to validate an idea. It doesn't matter you are a B2C company, you are a B2B company, or like us, who is a B2G, which is business to government company. Talk to your customers. Talk to your customers before you build the business. Talk to your customers before you kind of settle down on this idea of, this is the absolute thing that I need to go after. And again, you will not be able to do it if you hold that idea very, very close to your heart. Ideas may be interesting to other people, but it takes a lot of grit and a lot of energy to leave everything aside and build that idea. So don't get as much worried about, someone is going to steal my idea. And then the other thing is you might start somewhere. And the previous presenter, she was talking about, Natalie was talking about how they pivoted from Peso to Fin.ai. I used Peso a couple of years ago. I thought it was amazing service, but they pivoted, right? The question is, how do you pivot, right? And when do you pivot? These are absolutely not, the reasons that you should pivot. You shouldn't pivot just because there is market noise about something, right? You were working on a certain technology, a new kind of technology comes into picture, and you're like, oh, no, this is the next big thing. Not so much. There are companies who are still selling softwares built on COBOL, right? So be a little bit of cognizant of the market noise that might be influencing your decision. And then it shouldn't be based on what's the new hot thing. When to pivot. And this is absolutely what happened to us. We started with a company which was focused on real estate, right? We were using data to provide services to real estate. And then when we started working with the city government, and we had expertise within the team, our CEO, Mark, he had worked in both with the federal government and with the provincial governments for about 11 years. And we worked with the city government, and we found that it was a very hard problem to crack, especially selling to governments. And we thought that we had the advantage to navigate that process. So we pivoted based on the customer feedback. We spent the first year of our company's life embedding ourselves with our customers, just absolutely learning what they needed for their success. And then, do you have a scalable use case? Can you scale it to a few different customers? And then this is something that differs between B2C, B2C, B2G. I would say for B2C, where you're a business which is selling to customers directly, the easiest way to do is solve a pain point that you have, right? Nobody knows a pain point better than you yourself. Talk to multiple customers. 30 is a good number for surveys, right? If there are 30 people who are coming to you and saying, oh, this is also a pain point that I have, that's a good start. Then one of my friends once mentioned the $20 test, which is basically, you have an idea, you go to your friend, and you say, oh, I'm thinking about doing this startup, and your friend say, oh, great, amazing idea, right? And then you tell your friend, okay, why don't you pull $20 bill out of your pocket and pay me for this idea and build it for you, right? That is an absolutely great test. It is really hard to convince people to part away from their money. And so if that's a good test to see if that idea is actually real or your friend is just being nice to you. And then there's another way of doing it is called sunset test for sales, which is basically you think about an idea in the morning, you say, I'm going to pick up the phone, I'm going to make some sales. And if I can make like even one sale by the end of today before the sun sets, then it's probably a good idea to work on. And sell, then build, right? Which basically is like build your MVP as quickly as possible. How do I ideate for B2B and B2G? Find champions, right? This is something that has worked really well for us. Within the companies, if you have people whose pain points you are solving, within the governments, you have people whose pain points you are solving, those people will be your champions. Thought leadership and sharing, paying it forward. Herman and our CEO Mark, they have been invited to all different places. They've been invited to the White House to present on smart cities. They've been invited to present with the state government. Mark and I attended a panel at Harvard to share our thought processes within smart cities. Paying it forward in terms of sharing what you have or what you have learned through the process. And then, pay it forward. I'll leave you with this thought. A lot of times we become schizophrenic about the idea that we have in our head. Ideas are dime a dozen. I think it's the people who implement them, they are your most priceless asset. Thank you so much. Any questions?
I like him. He runs it himself. Any questions? I will come to you if there's some. Oh, thank you, Iman. 1 second.
Hey, thanks for the presentation.
Sure.
How do you deal with the risk of dealing with organizations that whose leadership change over every 3 or 4 years? As a business, that's got to make it hard to plan for. Do you have ways of kind of selling to government that entrench yourself so they can't just flip you off the next election cycle?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think I think it boils down to two things, right? If you have champions within organizations whose pain points you have solved, you will find that whenever the transition happens, your relationships will not just die away, right? They will make sure that they will make new connections for you. And in the end, it boils down to solving the right. And then I think the bigger thing you need to worry about is how good is your product, right? Within selling to government or selling to enterprise, the first thing is getting your step into the in the door, right? Which is the hardest thing to do, because typically in enterprise or when selling to government, you're competing with large companies like the IBMs and the Deloittes, and so as a startup, it's difficult to get your foot in the door. I think after that, it is like, how good is your product? How good customer service did you provide? And if you did two things right, I think when the transition happens, when people move away or the government changes, you will find connections. People will make connections for you. Yes.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation.
Sure, Mike.
I'm just curious, how did you come up with the idea, and what subject matter expertise, how deep was your knowledge on city planning and municipal data when you started?
Okay, let me start from the beginning. No, I'm just kidding. So that's a very good question. I think part of it was the journey, and part of it was the expertise that we had on board. When we started working with the city of San Francisco, which was, we applied to be startup in residence for the city of San Francisco, and we got in. And that is when we started solving their very first problem, right? And we liked working with government. But the second part of it was, working with government is not difficult. Navigating procurement is like the hardest part, right? Typically, government procurement is like 18-month-long cycles. And for startups to survive that long, to even collect that payment is usually quite a bit difficult, right? So you don't see a lot of startups within B2G. So to counter that, what we had is our CEO has experience working with different layers of government for more than a decade. So I think that experience came in very handy when we were trying to get into this vertical and trying to make sales. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Any other questions? Oh, it's my MacBook. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yes. It's Sean with that hip.
Now I don't know how to stand.
You just gotta work it. Work it.
On another note, so you talked about when to know how to pivot, and you started out in real estate and then moved to government. So what was the internal discussion like when you were doing real estate clients and then you decided, let's try to get this first government client? Why did you even think to do that?
That's a very good question. How was the internal discussion? I think part of it was driven by looking at where do we want to be. And for most startups, for some startups, you will have a very clear idea of where you want to go, right? For some other startups, you will discover it as you're going through the journey. I'm pretty sure when Jeff Bezos started Amazon, he was not thinking about selling everything. He was thinking okay, I'm going to sell a few things and some books, right? So for us, it was finding the first government client, which was which was City of San Francisco, the hub of tech. And then basically questioning, can we do it, right? And I think from the very beginning, within the co-founders, we have had this very open culture. And even we have led that culture even within the team that now we're hiring and expanding, which is no idea is a bad idea. And so we put everything on a table and we said, okay, what are our strengths? Where are we in terms of the journey of the startup? And can we do it, right? Do we have an advantage here? So it's putting all those things in perspective and then making a collective decision, right? So as long as everybody was on board, we just made the decision. And I would also want to point out our team is growing, and we're always looking for really good talent, programmers, data scientists. So if it's something that if helping city governments become better, give them tools to do better planning for the cities, something of your interest, feel free to reach out to me at Arvinder@UrbanLogiq.com. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Arvinder.